So what I was saying, Mark, is that I'm not going to spend a lot of time in introductions, apart from to say that you are an expert in the field of understanding why the cross from many different contexts, and have written widely in this area. And I'll just leave it to you to introduce yourself and any other things that you think might be appropriate for us. Professor Mark Baker, thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think maybe what shall I say? I mean, I live up the road a bit in Fresno. I've been here for 23 years teaching at a Mennonite seminary here in Fresno Pacific Biblical Seminary. I'm originally from the Northeast part of the United States. Lived in Honduras for 10 years as a missionary. And yeah, I think I will, with that, I will jump in and get to the content. So yeah, first of all, thank you for your interest in this and inviting me to present on this topic. I think it's a great question, and excited you're interested in it. So why the cross? And many answer that question. So if you say why the cross, many would look right at the cross and say, okay, why the cross? And then begin thinking sort of about the, maybe the logic, the mechanics of the cross, and maybe resurrection itself, and just focus in on that moment. And unfortunately, to do that leaves out Jesus's life. So for instance, in growing up in Christianity, the explanation that I had about why the cross was that humans are sinful, separated from God. God, being a just God, can't just forgive us. So there needed to be, the penalty had to be paid, or depending on how you phrase it, maybe you'd say, God needed to be satisfied in order to justly forgive. There needed to be punishment, or maybe wrath. God's wrath needed to be appeased. And then all of that was sort of this mechanics then of how the cross took care of that issue. And there, as I'll say later, I mean, I think there's some problems with that explanation. But part of what happens when that is by just focusing in on the cross and looking, okay, why the cross? Let's just look at that. It leaves Jesus's life out of it. And so, yeah, growing up, I mean, not that, I spent lots of times in the Gospels and talking about Jesus' life, but as far as the cross, what mattered for Jesus's life was just that he lived without sin. And that was really the only thing. And so now I want to take a step sort of aside. And so if we just put aside all we know about the cross and just pretend, you didn't know anything about this, and someone gives you, the Gospel of Mark or the Gospel of Luke or something, and you read it, and they ask you, why the cross? What's the simplest answer to that question? I mean, just the simplest basic answer. Why the cross? The simple, most straightforward answer would be, people were so upset with Jesus, they wanted to kill him. Right? I mean, just in a, sort of a historical sense, why the cross? People were really upset with Jesus. They wanted to kill him. Now, I'm not saying, okay, that's it, we're done. But to say, do you see how when we start at the cross, and often, I mean, since the Reformation put the cross, in a Western courtroom, we leave all that out of it. Like, people were upset with Jesus. Why was going on? So I could take our whole time this morning just developing a sense of, okay, let's look at Jesus's life, see what was happening, and how that tied into the cross and resurrection. But that's not what I'm going to do. But on the resource sheet that I think you have in your hands, or I think you can get electronically, I list on there's an article where I do that. About the narratives of the cross, and where you can look at that if you want to. But just let me like in 30 seconds to say, why the cross? If we look at Jesus's life, we see Jesus is continually including people that other forces in society were excluding. And this upset the Pharisees, it upset political leaders of the day. And Jesus never backed off of that. And the tension, the violence increased until he pretty literally died in the place of those people out of solidarity with them. And then, I think a key thing, if we start with Jesus' life, I think, this is a real thing. People were upset with him, wanted to kill him. And then how does Jesus respond? How does God respond? With forgiveness, not vengeance. So I invite you today, to keep Jesus's life in the background. And I'm going to share a number of different ways of talking about, explaining, proclaiming the cross, but I'm seeking to root them in Jesus's life. So I just wanted to begin with that little statement about let's keep the cross embedded in Jesus's life, and I think that helps better understand the cross. But it also then helps us keep Jesus' life central as we enter into a life of discipleship. So with that comment, and then I want to do two other little introductory things here, just by sharing an image with you, two images. So the first here, so in this this box you see, that for me, that box there represents the broad narrative of Jesus's life, death and resurrection that is recounted in the Gospels. And then the arrows there are what we would see then is when thinking about why the cross, the arrows represent different images or ways that in the New Testament, the writers of the New Testament, speakers in the New Testament, talked about the cross. And so I want to make a couple observations here. First of all, there are diverse arrows there, and no one of them captures everything that's underneath. So there's diversity, and no one pretends to capture everything. The other thing about these arrows, and I should just say, so concretely, what I'm thinking of these arrows, say, is when Paul talks about adoption, that would be one of those arrows, or justification, redemption. The author of Hebrews, uses sacrifices and imagery. Colossians 2, talking about the triumph over the powers at the cross. So each of those are one of those arrows. Now, another important thing when we think about the New Testament in relation to our question today of why the cross is, the New Testament proclaims the cross. It doesn't explain it. And what I mean by that is it proclaims the significance. It tells us through the cross of Jesus Christ, we are justified. We're brought into new relationship with God and others. We are cleansed. We're purified. We're adopted. But it doesn't get into the mechanics. Okay, well, exactly how does that work? So when we get into then the thinking about how's this, what's going on, so how does it work? That's work that we have done reflecting after the New Testament. The New Testament proclaims, doesn't explain. So diversity of images. And then the other image I want to keep for you as we work on this today is this of a jewel. And so you see a jewel here, think of a diamond, something like that. And imagine having this jewel in your hand, and as you turn it, the facets would, the light would hit it in different ways, and it changes what you see within that diamond, within the jewel. And the gospel is like that. So I like to talk about, the gospel diamond, and imagine holding it in your hand, turning around, and as we do so, we see different facets of it. So similar to the previous image, there is no one arrow that captures all. There's multiple images in the New Testament. And the other thing I like about this diamond image is we can't capture it all. There's new things. We keep seeing new things. So I am not today going to give you, okay, here are the 6 answers of why the cross, period, we're done. Some examples that get some of the depth, but there's, much more. So, okay, now that's sort of introduction. Now, what I'd like to do is, sort of the subtitle of today, Diverse Answers from Different Contexts. So you can go back to the New Testament. Why are there these different arrows and why are they different? Because in different settings, in Colossians, Paul is seeking to communicate something different because of what was going on there than maybe he was in Romans or Galatians. And the author of Hebrews is writing to one audience, different, uses different imagery. So then for us today as well, when we're thinking about why the cross, we should talk about it in different ways, in different contexts. So I'm going to give you, 5 or 6 different images of the cross today. And I want to start with, since I was kind of critical of, the explanation I grew up with, and I want to make clear that what I was critical of was some of the way it was framed and some of the logic of it. But the idea of, we're guilty and through the cross we have salvation. I don't want to say, oh yeah, let's get rid of that. Let's talk about it in other ways. So I want to start very briefly with an example, thinking that gospel diamond, talking about guilt. But hopefully, I'm going to do this very briefly, but you can feel a little bit of a difference than that explanation I'd said I'd grown up with, that, God must punish Jesus in our place in order to forgive us. So here's the situation. I lead here in Fresno, I lead a Bible study, a weekly Bible study in the county jail, Fresno County Jail. Been going for over 10 years, Friday afternoon for an hour. And so one week I go into the jail, and it's a jail like many jails today. It doesn't actually have, metal bars. The doors are metal thick and this reinforced glass. And so I'm in a hallway, and there's a big room where I have the Bible study, and then the guards bring inmates from their pods, they call them, the county jail, into the room. Well, there was an inmate in the room where I was supposed to have the Bible study. They sometimes put people in there just to hold them. And he yells at me through the crack in the door, right? Because there's no bar. So he yells at me through the crack in the door, and he says, and I can't remember whether he said, "Are you a chaplain or are you a pastor?" And sort of literally, no, I'm a volunteer at the jail. I'm a professor, not a pastor. So I'm, kind of hesitating, but then I thought, hey, Mark, for the reasons he's probably asking, just say yes. So I said yes, and he waves me over, and he says, "Could you pray for me?" And he said, "I'm supposed to get out in a week, but I got into a fight." And so, you just feel the weight on this person. He's feeling that. So I say a prayer for him. And as I'm talking to him, I'm aware, any moment the guard's going to come and get him to take him to another place, because I need to be using this room to have the Bible study in. But the guard hasn't come yet. So I think, okay, what can I say? What can I interact with this person? And I take that gospel diamond, I'm kind of, spinning it around in my hand, thinking, okay, what facet of this might connect with him? And I just had the thought, he's just been in a fight. He's feeling bad about having done this, inappropriate thing that now is, perhaps prolonged his stay in the jail. So I asked him, "Are you feeling guilty? Do you feel, would you like God's forgiveness? Do you feel God would forgive you?" Something like that. I can't remember exactly. And he said, yes, he's feeling guilty. And he sort of has doubts whether God would forgive him. So and again, quickly, I said just about this. I said, well, let's imagine, what's the worst thing that a human could do to someone else? And he kind of looks at me, and I said, well, killing someone, right? I mean, that's ending their life. That's really the worst thing you could do. And I said, humans have done that to God. God incarnate, Jesus Christ, God in the flesh, humans killed God incarnate. and killed him violently and with great shame. How do you think God responded? And again, I'm talking quickly, just like I am right now. I said, not with revenge, but with forgiveness. On the cross, Jesus says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And then afterwards, the resurrected Jesus didn't come out looking for vengeance, violence, getting back at people. Peace, forgiveness. And then I said to him, again, very quickly, borrowing a line from Tim Keller, I said, forgiveness isn't free, it costs. And God took on the cost. God suffered in our place the consequences of our wrongdoing, didn't take it out on us. And I said, so if you ever doubt whether God will forgive you or not, look at the cross, think about the cross. God will forgive. And then I said, I just prayed for you. You can pray and ask for God's forgiveness. That's a prayer you need to pray yourself. And then in that moment, the guard came and took him away. So why the cross? The cross provides forgiveness, a means of forgiveness, reassurance of forgiveness. Jesus in our place, taking on the consequences, the ultimate consequences of our sin, our alienation, and responding with forgiveness. So I invite you, just take a moment, reflect on that answer, that communication of it in that context. Okay, now I very quickly want to go to this sense of context. So tell you this story. So I have a student from sitting in my office from Japan, and I asked him how he became a Christian, and he told me his story, that he's not from a Christian background. He was lonely, depressed in university, kind of stumbled into a church and loved the community feel of it, kept going. And then he said, the pastor kept explaining to me how to become a Christian, talking about guilt and sin and salvation. And he said, I didn't understand it. Didn't make sense to me. I couldn't feel it. But he said, gradually, just over time, after hearing this explanation so many times, I could grasp it enough. And he said, I asked forgiveness for my sins, became a Christian. So, okay, what's going on there? Japan is an honor-shame society. That they relate more to a sense of honor and shame than guilt and innocence. And because of that, this explanation about the cross in terms of guilt didn't make sense to him. Matter of fact, after he said that, if I leaned forward and I said, Takao, wouldn't it have been wonderful if the first time someone talked to you about the cross, they would have talked about it in terms of honor and shame? And he said, that would have been beautiful. So what I'd like to share with you now is, so I co-authored a book called Ministering in Honor-Shame Cultures. And my co-author, Jayson Georges, lived in Kyrgyzstan for 10 years and thought a lot about how in the Kyrgyzstan setting can I communicate why the cross? Okay, so we're gonna enter. This is I think it's 4 or 5 minutes, a little video that he made to communicate the story that he used in Kyrgyzstan. So we're going to step out of your Los Angeles, our California context, go to Kyrgyzstan for a moment. So let me get the right thing queued up here. Okay, and shout out if this isn't working and you can't hear.
In the beginning was God. He's like an honorable elder with a grand yurt. He's like the great uncle we all wish for, powerful, respected, and always faithful. One day God created the mighty mountains, the warm sun, and fresh waters to showcase his glory. Then God made Adam and Eve, crowning them with great honor and glory. He said, "Have my authority, rule over my creation, bear my glory." They were God's children living in God's honorable village. Even with no clothes, Adam and Eve felt no shame. Then Satan appeared and said, "Get more glory, eat the fruit, and be equal to God." But the second they tasted the fruit, their honor vanished. They felt shame. God found them hiding. "You have been disloyal children, shaming yourselves and dishonoring me." What do we humans do with disgraceful things like dirt, pigs, and outhouses? We keep them far away to preserve our dignity. So likewise, God banished them. Adam was dejected. "I have no name, no glory, no family, and no honor. I have only shame." In the shameful village, Adam and Eve had children, who had us. Do you know what it means that we are descendants of Adam and Eve? Imagine if your mom was the village prostitute, or your dad defected during battle. You'd get their shame. We inherit shame, then our sin brings on more shame. So one day someone had an idea. Let's make our own honor. They created multiple groups or cultures. One said you had to wear black suits and drive Mercedes, but the other determined you have to wear orange robes and be a monk. If you maintain the group's expectations, you got some honor and status. But this honor was temporary because it was made by humans. These group rules actually increased shame by excluding some people. Even when God selected one group to bless the other groups with honor, they boasted in their election and shunned others. When people tried to create honor for themselves, they only produced more shame. The only person who could help the honorless was God, the source and essence of honor. So God became human and entered the shameful village. Could you ever imagine a big politician with a mansion going to live in a trash dump? That was Jesus. Jesus was amazing. One time a bleeding woman snuck up and touched him, and he wasn't defiled or shamed. She was purified and dignified by Jesus. He loved and accepted everyone, regardless of their shame. Jesus spoke of a great feast, where the disgraced and dismissed were honored guests. Following Jesus, not the cultural rules, makes people acceptable and worthy. But the people living for earthly honor were threatened by this, so Jesus was arrested, mocked, whipped, spat on, and nailed upon a cross. He was covered in shame publicly. Why? Why would one perfectly honorable person be so shamed? The shame Jesus bore was not his own. He bore our shame. And then Jesus fully defeated that shame. He rose from death to glory. Jesus crossed back to God's village and got a great name and place of honor. Jesus' resurrection from the dead built a new bridge from death to life, from earth to heaven, from shame to honor. Finally, people could get what they always wanted, true and eternal honor from God. But not everyone followed Jesus to God's village. Some were content with the false honor they accumulated. A few thought their shame too great even for God, and others feared what relatives might think. But some trusted that Jesus took their shame and followed him. To them, God gave a new robe, hat, and inheritance documents. Humans were back in God's village. They lived honorably ever after.
So again, please take a moment and reflect. Think about what stood out to you, what connections you felt. And I want to underscore, as I said when I introduced, I mean, that's foreign to our context. And yeah, if well, if Jayson was here, he could do more, but I could point out a number of things in there that are particular to their context. So for instance, in Kyrgyzstan, at least when Jayson was living there, a person of high status, like the Mercedes was the car to have, and to wear a black suit. So it had that little line. So there's a number of things in there that connect particularly with their thing. And that is what the Bible, the New Testament authors were doing in their time. So I think Jayson does a great job there of being very biblical in the sense of talking about the cross in a similar way as in the Bible without repeating the exact words images, pictures. Now, Kyrgyzstan's an honor-shame culture where honor and shame are much more the driving forces of how behavior is controlled rather than guilt, as we do in a more individualistic setting here. But we have shame as well and are burdened by shame. And I'm not going to take the time now to talk about how I talk about shame more in our context. But again, on the resource sheet, if you're interested in that, I've listed a few different things of my own where I proclaim freedom from shame through using some stories from Jesus's life, and then also pointed to some chapters in a book I edited of 3 or 4 different presentations where people talk about shame as well. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end. If you'd like to ask questions about that, you may as well. But I'd like to move on now. So we've had guilt. So why the cross? To release from guilt. Why the cross? To free from shame, to bring honor. That sacrifice, I mean, that's a word that, commonly comes up with in relation to the cross. So there's a lot about sacrifice in the Bible. And honestly, sacrifice is foreign to us. Think I'm guessing anyone listening here today has not experienced, a true, authentic blood sacrifice in a way that was meaningful and part of our lives. So it's something that ends up, I think, unfortunately, so it's talked about a lot in the Bible, and I think it often gets interpreted as payments. So I think what happens is, we're not really of the world of sacrifice, so we read it through lenses of this cross thinking that's really more in a Western courtroom, and make sacrifice about appeasement, paying off God so that God can forgive. And there's 2 problems with that. One is it's an image of sacrifice, not a courtroom image, but also the wrong courtroom. And again, on the resource sheet, I have a thing where I talk about the contrast between a Hebraic understanding of justice and a Western understanding of justice. But that leads us, I think, to view, sacrifice in the Old Testament as appeasing God, paying a fine or penalty. But if you actually read Leviticus, the thing it most talks about is cleansing and purity. The word wrath is not in the book of Leviticus. So with that, just a little bit of biblical background, what I want to do is take us to East Africa. So now we're going to go to a place where people, and this is from a few decades ago, from a man named Kisade, who was a Mennonite bishop in Tanzania. He did not grow up as a Christian, became a Christian later on in life. I was reading his autobiography, and in one place in that he talks about sacrifices, both in his cultural experience and then relating it to the cross. So he grew up in a context in which people practiced blood sacrifice, which it had meaning. So I excerpt a bit of his story in my the book I co-authored with Joel Green called "Recovering the Scandal of the Cross," and I want to just read a couple paragraphs from it as we think about why the cross sacrifice. So he starts, Kisade, this Luo, that was his tribe bishop. He starts by explaining that in their villages, if someone did something wrong, there is a degree of acceptance. They would put up with it, or they would, talk and forgive and carry on. But he said there were some actions that were beyond the pale, that led to someone being banned, kicked out of the village. So he said, for instance, if someone was sleeping with someone else's wife or one of his father's wives, that was an action that led to them getting kicked out. Or if they'd done something really violent wrong to someone else. And then what happened is the person is out of the village, and he said, and there's no, they can't just come back a week later and say, I'm sorry. But he said what happens is, after time, people want to go back to their village. They want to die, be buried in their place. And so he'd said, maybe it's 30, 40 years later, this person's now an old man and wants to come back home. And he said, no, but not how I'll read from him. He will send word to his father's village to ask to be accepted by them. And then he says, but no matter, what people think, they just can't just say, oh, sure, come back. He said, the evil thing must be undone. And then he quote, we know in our society that only the blood of a sheep killed in ritual sacrifice has the power to break the curse which the man brought upon himself when he sinned against his father and his village. So you hear that and this is their tribal tradition. So if someone had done this really, really bad thing, the only way they could come back was through the blood of a sacrificed sheep that would break this curse of evil. So then he goes on, he says, so they would say, okay, they'd set the date for the person to come back. They would cut a low opening in the village wall that he comes in, not through the front entrance. And then they would kill the sheep. The sheep's blood would be mixed with some juices. The lost person would confess fully the evil things done, and then would be symbolically cleansed by sprinkling this blood and mixture of liquid upon him. And then at that point, he can come in through that entrance cut in the wall. He is then again once in the village. And then they have a meal and they celebrate this reunion. Okay, so that's the tribal condition. So now think of Caesarea is talking about the cross to people who have that as part of their tradition. So why the cross? And so then he goes on in his story and he tells about this time when, so there's been this movement of people becoming Christians in Tanzania, but they're from different tribes. And he's, as I said, he was in the Mennonite church. So the missionaries that had gone there were, ethnically German, Mennonites from the United States, but ethnically German. And so what Caesarea talks about is we have all these different villages. He says these different ethnic villages, and they're all Christians, but their villages often trumped their Christian sisterhood and brotherhood. And I love that when he talked about these ethnic villages, he included the missionaries. So their ethnic German Mennonite thing, that was one village, and then there's a Luo village, there's other tribes. And he said they're not getting along. There's these tensions. So then he said, the Holy Spirit showed us that Jesus's sacrifice made it possible for all of us to be brothers and sisters in the same village. We saw the crucified Lamb of God whose blood removes the walls that separate people from each other, from God and from God, their Father. And so then he said, we then experienced the blood of Jesus as breaking this curse of ethnic tension, of cleansing us from this. And he said, from that moment of them coming and praying and asking for forgiveness, there was a new sense of harmony, of getting along in these different tribal villages. So why the cross? It is a sacrifice. The blood of Jesus cleanses. Okay, now, I can't see your faces closely, but when I just said that, the blood of Jesus cleanses, I would not think negatively of it all, if you kind of looked at me with a look of confusion. Because today, what is blood for us? Blood is a contaminant, right? I mean, think of how hard, in a medical center, we work to not, get blood on us. So this blood of cleansing, this is not part of our reality. So in Africa, they've experienced this. It works, not our experience. So I just want to very briefly just point to another, this is sort of related to sacrifice, but it's the use of blood, but it's from someone here in California. This is from Curtis Chang. He was a pastor in San Jose. And I'm borrowing from, this is the, I think it's the last chapter in that collection I mentioned, the Proclaiming the Scandal of the Cross. And so what Curtis Chang does, and he's wrestling with this, how do I talk about blood in context of San Jose and the cross as being, saving? So what he did, and this is pre-COVID, this was, 10 or 15 years ago that he did this, but he talked about the Ebola virus. And he said, imagine you're in this place where the Ebola virus is going on. People are dying. There's no cure known. What can we do? And he said, so then what if God's Son came into that setting and purposefully exposed himself to the virus, took the virus into his body, and then died like everyone else, but then came back to life, having conquered Ebola, and then would have the antibodies to give to others. And then, as you can imagine, then he relates that to the sin of sin and its affliction on us, and how Jesus has taken on that sin, has taken it, borne it, conquered it, and given us the antibodies for us as well to deal with that sickness. So again, let me give you just a moment of reflection to think about sacrifice, blood as cleansing, maybe Jesus's death as providing antibodies to sin. Why the cross? So the last image I shared, Curtis Chang, it has that sense of sacrifice because of blood, but it also comes in this sense of victory, of the cross being a victory. And for the first 1,000 years of church history, of the history of Christianity, if you would have asked someone why the cross, they would have given an answer. Most likely they would have answered it by saying, the cross was the victory over death, or through the cross, God conquered over the devil. Through the cross, sin was defeated. So the way of talking about cross for the first 1,000 years of church history was almost always in the sense of victory. And that's still the case. Like in the Orthodox churches, churches of the East, that is their way of talking about the cross. And then, in the West, we started bringing in other explanations. But I just mentioned that to say, this is not just Mark Baker, and Joel Green, my co-author, in the year 2000, thinking, okay, well, let's come up with some new ways of talking about the cross. We're actually seeking to reach back. So the way I grew up, having just, if we go back to that box, an arrow image, that I grew up with just one arrow, that's a new thing. That's a more since the Reformation. If we go back in church history, there were other ways of talking about it. So I want to work at this theme, this image, why the cross, think about it in terms of victory. But again, in a contextualized sense. So a way that might make sense in our setting. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch a movie clip from the very end of the movie, Gran Torino. And I want to give you, and so if you haven't seen the movie, sorry that I'm ruining it for you now because I'm giving you the very end, literally. But yeah, hopefully you've seen it. And so just if you haven't, give you a bit of a background, or if you haven't seen it for a while. So in this movie, there's a man named Walt who had fought in the Korean War, and he's haunted by things he did there. His wife has just died, so he's alone in his home. His neighborhood is changing. There have been a lot of Hmong people moving into the neighborhood. And he is not friendly to them. Like this is not the picture of, great cross-cultural sensitivity. He's not friendly to them, but his neighbor, a young Hmong woman, befriends him. And then through that friendship, also Walt comes in relationship with her younger brother, young teenager. I think he's about 13 years old. And a Hmong gang is pressuring the boy to join the gang. He resists. And at various points in the film, it's important to know that Walt uses force or threatens force to protect someone else's property, protect his own property, or at one point to stick up for this neighbor boy. And that included having a direct confrontation with the gang. So he's already had a confrontation where he threatened force and, backing down, that kind of thing. So the gang is upset with Walt and his neighbors, the family next door, and they retaliate by assaulting this young woman, the friend of Walt's, raping her, beating her up. And so her brother wants revenge and assumes that Walt does too. And he wants to go with Walt when Walt goes to attack this gang, because he's figuring that's what Walt is going to do. Oh, I forgot to mention, Walt is dying. That's a key thing. He knows he is heading towards death. Has a lung disease. Okay, so this is the scene we're picking up right now, that this has happened. The young boy's coming in and he thinks Walt is going to go get revenge. He wants to go with him. And we're going to watch about 8 minutes of this. And so a couple of comments. First of all, this is violent, bad language. So if you're watching online, you don't want to see this, then step away. And if you're present, sorry, cover your eyes, ears, or step away for 8 minutes. That's one thing. The other thing is, so I'm presenting this in relation to the question, why the cross? I think this is a metaphor, an image of the cross and how it provides salvation. Joel Green, my co-author, and I say, all metaphors limp. That means this is not a perfect analogy with the cross. Walt is not Jesus Christ. But I think there are things in this movie clip that do illuminate, that like a metaphor, help us to see, understand better. So I'm going to invite you, as you watch this, to be thinking about, how does this illuminate Jesus's work on the cross? How does it communicate what the cross does? And after this, after we watch this clip, I am then going to, I'm going to stop talking for a while and let you talk. So that's a question I'm actually going to invite you to join in on. So to think about, how does this illuminate the work of the cross? What do you see in this that's in relation to the cross? Okay, let me share my screen again. And again, shout out if this isn't working. So I invite you either there at the Cathedral or online to unmute yourself. And what are some ways that illuminated Christ's work on the cross? What are some things that it brings to light? How is it?
Let's begin by inviting the folks who are with us digitally, because they tend to be the ones who we don't always see. So think right with us now, I think we have Gloria with us. I'm not sure if there's others. So Gloria, if you have anything that you'd like to share.
Not really. I watched it. I am not really good at interpreting. I don't like movies. So but difficult for me to interpret what's going on. So no questions.
Okay. How about here at St. John's? Maybe we need a minute just to digest as well.
Yeah, and don't feel like you need to give, the whole big thing. You can just say one little thing that it brings to mind about a connection to the cross, and together we'll, come up with a list. But
well, one thing that struck me was the arrest of the gang members, and if you bring that into the Christus Victor model, it was as if the enemies are getting put into handcuffs and moved away the way the images of the Orthodox Church have Satan in handcuffs as Jesus leads out the Adam and Eve and all those among the dead.
yeah, thank you. I was right with the same image when you started talking. Thanks. Others?
I think sacrifice comes to mind. He kind of went in there to kind of what I'll call like he substituted or he replaced. He put himself out there to take all the pain and the murder, or in cold blood, that maybe, who knows, that other people might have, along with him, have taken. So he took all of that upon himself, and in so doing, he reduced the amount of bloodshed maybe that could have happened, and also maybe put an end to the violence in some way.
Thank you. Yeah, that's, I think, very well said. I mean, both the sense of substitution in place of and in ending a cycle. Thank you. Others?
Yeah, Walter was an outsider with respect to the Hmong community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Came in. Good. Others?
Well, the biblical theme of, leading captivity captive or taking captivity captive, it was an elegant solution in the sense that those folks who were really thought they were the captors became the captives. And that was done because if Walt had wanted to fight, he probably would have lost his life anyway, and his young Hmong friend would have lost his life as well. This way, he lost his life, but in fact, the solution was reached in an elegant way.
Yeah, thank you. Well said. Anything else?
It reminded me a little bit of the analogy of the cross as the mousetrap for the devil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let me, you said most of what I have on my list. But yeah, I think this sense of the contrast with if he had gone seeking revenge, which is what Tao, the Hmong boy, assumed he was doing, it wouldn't have worked. I mean, there might have been yeah, he might have killed a couple people, he got killed, but it would keep on going, but it put a stop to it. And so the same way that Jesus, the cross is not about revenge. And even, if Walt had a gun, I mean, that's right. There's a couple lines there at the end with that interchange with the policeman, which I think, enable the analogy work even better, of saying he didn't even have a gun. There were witnesses this time. So there's also this sense of Walt's action exposing. And so in the same way, the cross exposes the power of sin and evil. And then, but one thing that, and this I'm getting from a student in the past, but that they point out that Toews was caught in this gang world, even if he didn't want to, and we're caught in this world of sin. And then Walt liberates by his action. So thank you for working with me on that. And again, an analogy, not perfect, but one that I do think illuminates. So, okay, so it's 1 o'clock. I don't know. Do you want to take some time for questions, or do you want to quit now? What would you like to do?
Let's just take just a couple more minutes for questions. If anybody has any burning questions beyond the video,
right?
That you might have. And one thing to say, I think, is what your presentation generally illuminates so clearly is not only that metaphors limp, or as Kathy Grebe says, metaphors always need crutches, but that there are many, right? And that we shouldn't be satisfied with just one, and not one is just the only way, right? But these are all facets, as you say, of exploring this question. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so, thank you, Father Mark, questions about any of this, because I didn't share this one at the end, sort of as a climax to say, this is it. So I think the story of the village in Kyrgyzstan, or me with the inmate, those are all part of this gospel diamond. So any questions or comments on any of it?
One of the books that had a very great impact upon me a few years ago, and I actually heard some lectures by the author. I want to know what your perspective would be on, like, say, for instance, the book Peace Child by Don Richardson.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So something I strongly affirm about Don Richardson and Peace Child is, I think he was a very good missionary in the sense of going and, I should say, so for people who don't know this is a missionary in, I think, Iron Jaya, in a tribal village, non-Christian, and he's trying to figure out how to explain to them the gospel of Jesus Christ. So what I think he did very well was to look in their setting for something that would help him communicate as an analogy. And in that sense, I strongly affirm it. I think it, in their setting of this, child that was given from one chief to another as a way of making peace, I think it can work well. There are some, I'd say, particular aspects maybe of how Richardson then works with and explains it that I might disagree with. But in general, I affirm the approach. And I should say, I haven't read it, or seen the movie now for probably 15 years. So I shouldn't speak with very much,
Well, he refers to redemptive parallels. And what I was mostly reflecting on was the fact that what you're doing is providing redemptive parallels, and he's building bridges with these images. And I think we can take lots of different diverse images, tailor them to the culture, and be able to find a way to relate the gospel to them. As you referred to, this was a missionary effort by him rather than a theological way to
Right.
explain the atonement or anything like that. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, Mark, this is, oh, Suzanne. One final question from Suzanne.
Well, in the Jewish tradition, well, not now, of course, but in the old Jewish tradition, when they were sacrificing animals, and I think mostly around the world, when people sacrifice animals, part of it is after the animal is killed, then they cook it and everybody eats it together. How does that have any, that feast, does that have a place in the sacrificial cross analogy?
Yeah, that is a wonderful observation and question, Susan. I affirm your instinct. So let me first say, in Leviticus, if you read, the first chapters of Leviticus, there is a tremendous amount of detail on how to perform sacrifices, and almost no explanation of the mechanics of how they work. Like, we're told what they accomplish, that this is a sin offering, a guilt offering, a Thanksgiving offering, a covenant, ceremony. But how it does that, we don't know. And so, actually, I read one scholar of Leviticus, and he said, rather than, and again, trying to get us out of this sort of courtroom thing of, oh, this is about, an appeasement offering, paying off, satisfying. He said, actually, the whole, not just afterwards, but the whole thing is a sense of meal. So he said, for us, this is very, butchering and all this. It's a very, foreign kind of bloody thing. But he said, for them, this is something they did all the time. They were, they're butchering animals and blood, and it was meal preparation. So he said he likes to view sacrifices, almost in that sense of me inviting you my home for a meal. So a way that I would honor you, give you thanks, is, bring you into my home, let's have a meal. So God is distant from them, separated, but then maybe offering this sacrifice, burning it, is a sort of sense of demonstration of communion, of eating, fellowship with God. So then in the same way, then the meal afterwards is continuing in that. So I think, I'm quite friendly to ways of thinking about the cross as bringing together, unifying, establishing relationship. And then, just think of Eucharist, of the connection there. So, these are things that are deeply woven together, not some, we've got this transaction over here at the cross that pays some penalty, so we're okay. And then we have you, and they're woven together. I don't know. Father Mark, do you have something you build on that?
Do you have one other thing? Okay, quick, Rob.
I'm wondering, I was see just what Susan was saying, and relating to the film Babette's Feast. And how Babette sacrifices her winnings of the lottery and also cooks this meal to bring peace to these people. How do you see that?
I think Babette's Feast has great potential as an analogy image of working and thinking about cross and salvation.
I would, okay, one more, okay.
I was just going to say thank you so much for breaking down what I call the mechanics of forgiveness, how it costs, and how we take it. God took it upon himself, and how he provides that example of us taking it upon ourselves to forgive one another by bearing the cost of forgiveness.
You're welcome.
Yes. all of this talk about sacrifice, Mark, reminds me of a story that Rob Bell tells of talking with a gentleman who came from an African village context, where in that village there was the continual offering of sheep and goats and chickens to the point where the livestock that they had for their own support was being decimated. And they eventually were converted to Christianity and heard the story of the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, that there needed no more to be sacrificed. And Rob Bell asked him, well, what did that teach you? And the gentleman said, Jesus shaves the sheep and the goats and the chickens.
Quite holistic, yes.
So Mark, thank you so much for being with us today. And we again apologize that we've gone a bit over the time that we had originally suggested. So we thank you for your patience and for your wonderful presentation and all of these wonderful images that you've left with us as we enter into this time of moving into Holy Week and concentrating more fully on our Lord's last week, that we have some things to chew on here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and blessings to you. Yeah, and I hope from this that, yeah, you're stretched and informed intellectually, but also that through this you may experience in new ways the beauty of that gospel diamond and the depth of the liberating, freeing power of Jesus's death and resurrection. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.